At Houston's Lakewood Church Arena, a beaming minister in a fitted blue suit prepared to confront an iconic figure amid 20,000 attendees. What started as a charitable evening focused on belief and health grew intensely earnest as the planet's top evangelist summoned the globe's most regimented warrior. Joel Osteen stood apart from standard TV preachers. Over 30 years, he had served as the nation's advocate for optimism, captivating vast audiences with flawlessly crafted messages. Yet this evening he encountered an individual immune to showmanship. Chuck Norris, the former military title holder and karate expert, renowned for concluding conflicts swiftly. When Osteen playfully suggested a sacred duel, he didn't realize he was beckoning the serene force of someone who prioritized control over fury. Chuck replied without aggression, offering instead a teaching on equilibrium that would dismantle the minister's facade of presentation and reveal the person behind the preaching. Every phrase and gesture turned into a strike not against flesh but against vanity. What originated as a pretend confrontation for donations evolved into a profound soul-searching moment viewed by countless people. The Lakewood Assembly and maybe society at large would forever change once Chuck Norris illustrated that ultimate power resides in modesty and the toughest conflict occurs internally. Before we proceed, share your location with us. And if this tale resonates with you, ensure you're following us as I've prepared a unique surprise for tomorrow. The Lakewood Church Arena buzzed with expectation. 20,000 individuals filled the seats, their expressions lit by the stunning display of lights flowing over the arched roof. The huge space, formerly Houston's pro basketball venue before Joel Osteen converted it into the country's biggest megachurch, had been repurposed once more for this unique gathering. Faith and Fitness Night proclaimed the electronic signs encircling the area. Film teams stationed at key spots recorded all perspectives for the online broadcast, connecting to additional millions. The platform, usually featuring a timber lectern and the congregation's acclaimed singers, now included an elevated area bordered by plush cords, resembling a combat zone while preserving adequate sacred propriety. Victoria Osteen observed from the sidelines, her composed grin concealing the discomfort she sensed regarding the night's display. She adjusted the neckline of her beige jacket and glanced at her timepiece. The presentation lagged by 3 minutes, meaning Joel would be striding restlessly behind the scenes, eager for his appearance. "Quite an elaborate setup," a resonant tone remarked next to her. Victoria pivoted to see Head of Protection Raymond Mendoza, known as Big Ray around Lakewood, scanning the gathering with trained alertness. A retired Marine with arms wide as stable entrances, Ray's attendance always calmed her, even during evenings like this when things seemed a bit unbalanced. "Do you believe we've overdone it this time?" she inquired, pointing at the simulated arena. "It feels more like entertainment than devotion." Ray kept his face impartial. "It's for a good cause, Mrs. Osteen. The funds assist many individuals." "I realize that," Victoria exhaled. "But Joel becomes so immersed in these grand occasions. And with Chuck Norris as our featured visitor." She paused as the interior illumination faded. A beam of light cut through the shadows, highlighting Reverend Levi Robinson as he leaped onto the platform. At 32, Levi ranked as the junior cleric on the team and Joel's preferred energizer. In his stylish pants, impeccably styled locks, and boundless vigor, he represented Lakewood's fresh wave of ministers. "Houston!" Levi yelled, his boosted voice echoing across the space. "Are you prepared to see something epic?" The group shouted back. I asked, "Are you prepared?" Levi echoed, placing his palm near his ear. The spectators exploded more loudly, thousands standing up. "That's the spirit." Levi smiled, striding across the area with the device in grip. "This evening goes beyond collecting donations for our worldwide outreach programs. This evening demonstrates that belief isn't merely a calm activity for weekend mornings." "Amen," voices rang out from the assembly. "Belief is vibrant," Levi went on. "Belief is forceful. Belief is energetic. And this evening, we're honoring the power derived from both inner and outer control." The assembly's enthusiasm swelled as the initial tones from Lakewood's praise group filled the space. The tunes merged modern religious verses with a rhythmic pulse, suitable for a title bout introduction. "Ladies and gentlemen," Levi declared, his tone falling to a staged hush before rising once more, "please greet the individual who has delivered divine words of optimism and triumph to more souls than any other on earth. Your leader, your motivator, your inner heavyweight title holder, Joel Osteen." The space burst into cheers as Joel marched forward, limbs lifted in success, his signature grin shining beneath the beams. He sported a custom blue outfit that suited a cleric while accentuating his dedication to bodily wellness. At 59, Joel preserved the lively aura that had elevated him to widespread recognition. "Good evening, Houston," Joel proclaimed, his tone comforting and known to millions. "What a remarkable evening lies before us. I sense the vitality here. Are you experiencing blessings this evening?" "Yes," the group boomed in reply. "Exactly. I need you to face your companion and tell them, 'Companion, I am blessed and greatly preferred.'" The assembly obediently echoed the words to each other, the custom generating a surge of uplifting confirmation across the space. Joel glowed, examining his followers. "You know, certain folks assume that following Christ implies fragility. They view belief as something for those unable to face life's trials." He shook his head. "But Scripture states in Philippians 4:13 that I can achieve everything through Christ who empowers me. Everything." "Amen," the group answered. "God doesn't desire us to exist in defeat, believing we lack the capability." Joel proceeded, his tone ascending and descending with rehearsed rhythm. "He wishes us robust in physique, thoughts, and soul. That's the reason this evening's faith and fitness gathering is so meaningful." He motioned toward the prime seating. "And we are fortunate to include among us a person who represents power and control, a person whose identity has become equivalent to resilience, yet who follows a standard of integrity and belief." The lens shifted to the special area where Chuck Norris rested calmly. At 84, the karate icon held the steady demeanor that had established him as a symbol. His aged features stayed stoic under his distinctive reddish-brown mane. He dressed in a basic black-collared top without a necktie and sat with palms clasped on his knees. While those nearby hummed with thrill, Chuck seemed tranquil like the center of a storm. "Ladies and gentlemen," Joel stated, "please applaud the unique, the singular Chuck Norris." The assembly stood in booming cheers. Chuck recognized the welcome with a minor incline and an elevated palm, but stayed seated. Joel carried on, unfazed by Chuck's modest reaction. "Chuck has motivated millions via his karate, his films, his TV appearances, and his charitable work. He's also a deeply devoted individual who has always stood firm for his convictions. Chuck, it's a privilege to include you this evening." Chuck gave another courteous incline. Levi sprang back onto the platform, his gaze sparkling with playfulness. "You know what would be fantastic, Pastor Joel?" I believe the whole crowd would concur. He halted for emphasis. "What if, and this is just an idea, what if we observed a small exhibition? I mean, we have the famed Chuck Norris and our pastor who's been training diligently these recent years." A wave of astonished chuckles spread through the assembly. Joel chuckled as well, patting his toned abdomen. "Now, Levi, I don't believe folks arrived to witness that sort of contest." "I'm not certain," Levi insisted, facing the spectators. "Would anyone want to view Pastor Joel and Chuck Norris in a casual light spar? Perhaps for additional contributions to this evening's purpose." The proposal, intended as humor, triggered an unforeseen reply. Isolated shouts grew into broad clapping. Someone initiated a slogan, "Holy fight! Holy fight!" Victoria observed from offstage, her grin stiffening. "This is escalating too much," she whispered to Big Ray. The protection leader inclined his head, his attention monitoring Chuck's response. "I'm unsure Mr. Norris finds this entertaining." On the platform, Joel embraced the crowd's zeal. "Well, this is surprising. What do you say, Chuck? Interested in instructing this minister some techniques?" He laughed, obviously regarding it as innocent fun. The camera focused on Chuck, who stayed blank-faced, evaluating Joel with the serene scrutiny of one experienced in real battle. In the brief quiet, Victoria emerged from offstage and quietly neared her spouse. "Joel," she murmured, contacting his limb, "perhaps we should advance to the following part." But Joel was absorbed in the assembly's vigor. He softly shifted by her, nearing the platform's border closest to Chuck. "I'm only jesting, naturally," Joel told the spectators, though his focus stayed on Chuck. "But imagine it. The evangelist against the icon. We might label it fists of faith." The group chuckled approvingly, while some senior members in the initial rows shared uneasy looks. "In truth," Joel proceeded, his grin steady, "I hold only admiration for Chuck. At my years, I'm more suited to a punching bag regardless. Chuck would have me yielding before I could utter, 'Hallelujah.'" Additional chuckles echoed through the space. Chuck's look stayed unaltered, his calmness growing more prominent amid the display. Levi, detecting the instant fading, interjected. All right, since we can't arrange these two in combat, let's proceed to our primary activity. Tonight's donation contest will... Joel cut in, an emerging thought evidently shaping. You know, this is an exceptional evening. Perhaps we ought to provide what the audience desires, just a minor exhibition. He faced Chuck again. What do you think, Chuck? Not an actual battle, of course, but perhaps you could display a technique or two for the cause. The space held its air. Chuck Norris gradually rose. The action was straightforward, leisurely, yet it drew focus more potently than all the night's dramatics. He achieved his complete stature, smoothed his top with a relaxed pull, and locked eyes with Joel directly. A silence descended over the assembly. The initial emblematic signal, really just the schedule alert for the section switch, sounded through the space's audio. Like a combat signal, it emphasized the instant with eerie precision. Nobody stirred, nobody uttered a word. Chuck Norris started advancing toward the platform. Chuck's calculated strides toward the platform generated a quiet so absolute, you could detect the ventilation system operating in the immense space. Each step appeared intentional, directed, the gait of someone who never required haste. Joel kept his grin, but those nearest the platform spotted a flash of doubt on his features. This deviated from the knight's meticulously organized plan. It appears Chuck is accepting my invitation, Joel declared, infusing joy into his tone. This is what I appreciate about our gatherings, always packed with unpredictabilities. The spectators' reply was subdued, their concentration locked on Chuck's advance to the platform stairs. Big Ray shifted nearer to the area's border, his protective senses engaged despite his admiration for the karate master. Levy Robinson, uneasy with quiet, hurried to occupy the gap. Ladies and gentlemen, this is becoming intriguing. Who's set for a brief display from the expert himself? Show some enthusiasm. The group replied with claps, but it missed the prior fervor. Something in Chuck's manner had altered the mood from amusement to expectancy. Victoria examined her spouse attentively, identifying the faint signs of his unease, the somewhat rigid nature of his grin, the manner his balance transferred between feet. She'd observed it previously when occasions strayed from plan, though Joel seldom permitted his poise to falter openly. Chuck arrived at the stairs and commenced climbing. Despite his years, he progressed with smooth fluidity, each motion equilibrated and managed. The beam, still centered on Joel, now expanded to include both figures. Pastor Joel, I believe you could be in difficulty, Levi teased, attempting to preserve the cheerful atmosphere. Perhaps we should have your attorneys prepare a rapid release before this advances further. Isolated laughs pierced the strain, but swiftly diminished as Chuck attained the area and positioned himself opposite Joel, several paces separating them. Joel offered his palm. Chuck Norris, everyone, let's applaud a genuine American symbol. The claps were deferential but hesitant, the assembly detecting something developing past simple amusement. Chuck grasped Joel's palm and gripped it solidly, a basic politeness that somehow bore the seriousness of a ceremony. He hadn't voiced anything yet, so Joel went on. I was merely enjoying the sacred battle concept, but since you're present, perhaps you could offer some ideas on how your karate control links to your devotion. That would motivate us all. It was an elegant redirection, an effort to convert the instant into a standard witness account, but Chuck appeared to follow a separate outline altogether. Rather, he extended for the device Levi held, who relinquished it with a typical submissiveness. The space grew entirely motionless as Chuck lifted the mic to his mouth. Control, Chuck stated plainly, his tone profound and paced, isn't about confronting others. It's about commanding oneself. The declaration lingered, making more impression than any of the night's boosted encouragements. Joel inclined eagerly. Definitely. Self-restraint is a result of the spirit, as the Bible informs us. That's what I've always respected about your path, Chuck. The control and concentration you apply to all you undertake. Levi, spotting a chance to regain the gathering's pace, added, regarding concentration, Pastor Joel has been quite dedicated to his wellness routine recently. I've witnessed him in our facility gym exerting real effort. He faced the spectators with a secretive smile. Ladies, isn't that correct? Our minister looks quite in shape lately. Women's voices cheered in approval as Joel dismissed the remarks with a chuckling, now. But the instant clashed with Chuck's seriousness. Possibly, Chuck remarked, each term intentional. We ought to recall the reason we're assembled here this evening. It was a soft reorientation, given without censure, yet the result was instant. Various spectators inclined in consensus. Some even whispered, "Amen." Joel cleared his voice. "Completely correct, Chuck. This evening concerns gathering resources for our international outreach efforts. And on that note, I'm excited to reveal that we've already exceeded our starting target of $1 million. The group clapped, though numerous gazes stayed on Chuck, anticipating. Victoria, detecting the necessity to guide the gathering back to known ground, indicated to the operations crew. The primary displays showed the donation collection amounts while the praise group performed a few gentle notes. "Chuck," Joel proceeded, "since you've graciously joined us on stage, I wonder if you'd tell our spectators how your devotion has directed you through your extraordinary path. Many of our youth regard you as an example." It was a skilled questioner's method, shifting to a traditional account style, but Chuck seemed to operate from an entirely distinct plan. "From my background," Chuck stated, "genuine devotion doesn't require display. It's serene, steady, like a correct combat posture, not flashy but immovable." The terms weren't presented as rebuke, but their influence spread through the space. Several congregational leaders swapped looks on the operations area. An audio technician murmured to his partner, "Is he questioning Pastor Joel?" Joel preserved his grin, though it strained mildly at the edges. "Nicely put, devotion is truly our base." "Regarding bases, you referenced a conflict," Chuck interposed, his manner still casual but straightforward. "May I inquire why?" The query lingered, basic yet somehow heavy with significance. The spectators leaned ahead as one. Joel chuckled, though the noise held a tense quality. "Merely a metaphor, Chuck, a small jest to amuse the group. Clearly, I wouldn't really—" "Because from my background," Chuck proceeded as if Joel hadn't commented. "Those who discuss battling often seek to dazzle. Those who truly understand combat favor tranquility. Preparing and sharing this account required considerable effort from us, so if you're appreciating it, follow our channel. It supports us greatly." Now returning to the account. The remark wasn't given with antagonism, more like the tranquil note of an instructor pointing out a learner's mistake, yet it delivered with clear force. A whisper circulated through the assembly. In the initial seating, congregational leader Thomas Wilson grimaced noticeably. Levi, trying to ease the increasing strain, interjected, "Well, we're certainly all for tranquility here at Lakewood. Blessed are those who make peace, correct, Pastor Joel?" "Definitely," Joel consented promptly. "And Chuck has served as an excellent model of someone who advances control and regard through his karate instruction." Chuck remained immobile, his look unaltered. Yet in some way his aura appeared to grow in the quiet that ensued. Victoria gestured urgently from the platform side, tracing a digit across her neck, the common signal to end the part. But Joel, perhaps sensing that departing now would seem like withdrawal, continued. "Actually," he stated, his tone recovering some of its typical assurance, "that's precisely what I intended with the sacred battle remark. Not bodily clash, but the inner control to contend for what's proper in this realm, to defend our devotion even when difficult." He faced the spectators, more at ease, speaking to them straight. "Isn't that what we do daily? Contend the noble battle of devotion. Remain steadfast against pessimism and uncertainty." "Amen," came replies from the assembly, the known exchange pattern aiding in resetting the mood. Chuck stayed quiet, observing. Bolstered by the spectators' response, Joel went on, "You know, occasionally I believe people anticipate Christians to be inactive, to simply offer the other side and never defend themselves. But the Bible contains many warriors. David confronting Goliath, Joshua toppling Jericho's barriers. His tone adopted the rhythm of sermonizing now, each statement constructing upon the previous. Sometimes devotion means possessing the bravery to enter life's arena and proclaim, 'I will not be overcome. I will not be disheartened. I am prepared. I am strengthened. I am designated for success.'" The group reacted with zeal. Yes, hallelujah. Joel was in his domain again, harnessing the surge of assembly vigor. He strode the platform, no longer directly interacting with Chuck but presenting for the spectators. "So when I mention a sacred battle, I'm referring to the struggle against deprivation that our outreaches conduct daily. I'm referring to the struggle against despair that divine words assist us in conquering." More confirmations ascended from the spectators. The praise group, detecting the change, started performing faint underscoring tunes to amplify the instant. And yes, Joel proceeded, his tone elevating, I'm referring to the bodily control that aids us in becoming our optimal selves, the type of control that our featured visitor represents. He pivoted to recognize Chuck, stretching a limb toward him as if to integrate him into the address. But Chuck was absent. While Joel had been speaking to the group, Chuck had silently retreated, setting the device on an adjacent holder. He now positioned at the area's border, viewing the display with the same detached look he'd held all along. The second emblematic signal, another operations alert, rang through the audio system. The spectators' focus divided, eyes shifting between Joel mid-address and Chuck in his intentional retreat. The instant formed a visual opposition that couldn't have been more vivid if planned. Joel dynamic, motioning widely, voice climbing in rehearsed peaks. Chuck motionless, observant, silent. Even Joel detected the alteration in the spectator's concentration. He turned, briefly puzzled, to discover Chuck a few steps distant. Chuck has the correct approach, Joel regained smoothly. Occasionally we must retreat and obtain viewpoint. Actually, let's all pause to consider what genuinely counts in our inner path. He shut his eyes illustratively, head mildly lowered. Many in the spectators imitated. In that fabricated instant of consideration, Chuck Norris chose his course. He advanced back to the platform's center, each stride purposeful. Joel reopened his eyes to find Chuck positioned right before him. Perhaps, Chuck stated softly, sufficiently audible for Joel's device to capture. It's time for that exhibition after all. A shared inhalation swept the space. The online broadcast discussion surged with entries. In the operations area, the overseer murmured hastily into his communication. Remain on them. Close views on both expressions. Joel blinked, his constant grin wavering briefly before reestablishing. An exhibition? Well, I was largely kidding about the sparring contest, Chuck. He provided a mild laugh that received scant reflection in the spectators. Not sparring, Chuck explained, his tone conveying effortlessly despite its softness. An exhibition of self-restraint. Something in his manner, not menacing yet unquestionably resolute, prompted Big Ray to advance half a pace from his spot at the platform's side. The protection leader's palm instinctively neared his communicator, though he gave no directives to his group. Victoria viewed the scene develop with increasing worry. She understood her spouse sufficiently to identify when his refined surface was being examined. Joel flourished on affirmative vigor, on being the most engaging, most uplifting individual in any setting. Confrontation, particularly the calm, ethical type that Chuck personified, was not his strength. Self-restraint is undoubtedly a merit, Joel recognized, trying to retain command of the story. Actually, Proverbs informs us that a tolerant individual is superior to a soldier, one with self-command superior to one who captures a town. Exactly, Chuck inclined. Would you exhibit that tolerance now? Before Joel could reply, Levi advanced, his drive to shield his guide surpassing his typical respect for fame. I think what Pastor Joel proposed earlier was more of a symbolic exhibition, right? The inner conflict, not the bodily one. Chuck shifted his stable stare to Levi, who promptly grew quiet, not from fear, but from the abrupt awareness that he was disrupting something important. I wasn't inviting Pastor Osteen to a bodily conflict, Chuck clarified, his tone keeping its paced serenity. I was encouraging him to exhibit the inner concept he was just proclaiming. He pivoted back to Joel. You discussed control and remaining steadfast. Would you be prepared to demonstrate what that appears like? The query lingered, misleadingly basic, yet charged with meaning. Joel paused, clearly assessing his choices. To decline would oppose the assured image he had nurtured. To consent would guide him into unfamiliar area with a man whose lifelong martial control rendered him unforeseeable. I'm always prepared to exhibit devotion concepts, Joel eventually responded, his tone projecting assurance that didn't fully extend to his gaze. What do you suggest? Chuck took off his black coat, exposing a basic collared top. The action was leisurely, nearly ritualistic in its carefulness. He creased the coat neatly and set it on a close seat. Position here, Chuck indicated, pointing to a location straight ahead of him. The assembly observed in silent captivation as Joel followed, shifting to stand roughly 3 feet from Chuck. The two figures formed a contrast study. Joel in his custom outfit, refined and lens-prepared. Chuck in his plain clothing, seasoned and real. In karate, Chuck described, his tone now reaching the spectators without requiring boosting. The initial concept isn't how to assault, it's how to position. He adjusted mildly. Feet set at shoulder distance, mass distributed evenly. Nothing ostentatious, nothing overdone. Just the core posture that had shaped the basis of his combat method. A suitable posture means you can't be readily shifted, Chuck proceeded. Not because you're stiff, but because you're aligned. Your base decides all that comes after. The spectators attended with complete focus. The amusement they'd anticipated changing into something deeper. "Would you replicate my posture?" Chuck requested Joel. Joel, maybe relieved the ask, appeared harmless, inclined. Gladly. He modified his footing to match Chuck's setup, keeping his lens-ready grin during. "Now," Chuck stated, "I'm going to set my palm on your arm. I need you to oppose being displaced." He elevated his right palm gradually, signaling each action before placing it softly on Joel's left arm. "Prepared?" Chuck inquired. Joel inclined, firming his arms. "Prepared." Without any apparent effort, Chuck exerted minimal force and Joel staggered rearward. Surprised by how simply his equilibrium was upset, he steadied fast, chuckling to mask his astonishment. "Whoa, you still possess that Chuck Norris power," Joel remarked, trying to convert the instant into a cheerful interaction. But Chuck's look stayed sincere. "It wasn't power. It was your posture. You were arranged to seem equilibrated, not to be equilibrated." The note delivered with uneasy accuracy. In the initial seating, Elder Wilson adjusted in his place. Abruptly, very engaged in the agenda details he'd been disregarding all night. "Let's attempt once more," Chuck proposed. "This time concentrate not on how your posture appears, but on how it links you to the floor." Joel inclined, his grin somewhat less sure as he restarted the position. This time he focused more deeply, clearly attempting to apply Chuck's direction. Again, Chuck set his palm on Joel's arm, and again Joel was readily moved, though not as sharply as prior. "Improved," Chuck recognized. "But you're still considering the spectators. I can detect it in your bearing." The note hit uncomfortably near. Joel had indeed been aware of his appearance to the thousands observing, the lens perspectives, the illumination, the effect he was creating. Victoria viewed her spouse's features show an uncommon instant of real unease. Part of her desired to step in to shield him from this unforeseen shift in the night's agenda, but another part acknowledged the genuineness of the instant, something growing scarcer in their meticulously managed public existence. "One additional time," Chuck stated. "But now disregard everyone else's present. Discover your alignment, not where you believe it should be, but where it really is." Joel inhaled and reset his posture. For maybe the initial time that night, his concentration turned fully inward instead of outward. His look changed, the staged grin dissolving into something more reflective. Chuck paused, permitting Joel this instant of readjustment. Then with the identical soft action, he set his palm on Joel's arm. This time Joel stayed firm. Chuck inclined, a spark of endorsement crossing his features. "That's it. Not because you're opposing me, but because you're correctly aligned with yourself." Joel appeared truly astonished at the result, and his following grin held something rarer than his typical charm: genuineness. "Now," Chuck proceeded, "the second concept of karate is consciousness, not merely of your rival, but of yourself." He retreated a pace and motioned to the gap between them. "I'd like you to deliver a strike." A whisper spread through the assembly. On the operations area, the overseer signaled urgently to his lens handlers to narrow their captures. Joel's gaze expanded. "Deliver a strike at you? I don't think—" "Not to connect with me," Chuck explained. "Just to feel the action while preserving the consciousness you just discovered. I'll deflect it naturally." Joel glanced uncertainly toward Victoria, who provided him a minor incline. Whatever was occurring had advanced past the standard plan into something unrefined and unplanned, but perhaps essential. "All right," Joel consented, clearly beyond his ease but dedicated now. "Though I should alert everyone, I'm not precisely Muhammad Ali." His triad wit gained isolated chuckles. The assembly, as unsure as he was about this developing situation, Joel elevated his fists clumsily, obviously unfamiliar with even the fundamentals of boxing bearing. He signaled his aims with every action as he readied to deliver what assured to be a very untrained strike. "Before you act," Chuck directed, "question yourself why you're delivering this strike." The query surprised Joel. "Why?" "Well, because you requested me to as part of the exhibition." Chuck shook his head mildly. That's the outer cause. What's the inner one? Joel delayed, truly confused. I'm not certain I comprehend. Every deed stems from a purpose, Chuck described. Some deliver a strike from wrath, some from dread, some to dazzle others. His stare held Joel's firmly. What's motivating your deed right now? The query lingered, surpassing the direct situation of their exhibition and piercing something more basic. The assembly appeared to jointly pause breathing, detecting the symbolic heaviness of the instant. Joel's rehearsed articulateness abandoned him. For several moments he remained fixed in his awkward combat posture, visibly grappling with a query that delved far deeper than the bodily exhibition. Joel started, then halted. For perhaps the first time in years of public service, he seemed truly speechless. The third emblematic signal, yet another operations alert, though its timing appeared nearly heaven-sent, rang through the space's audio. In that instant of paused motion, with Joel still immobilized mid-insight and Chuck awaiting with endless tolerance, Big Ray spotted activity in the spectators. Elder Wilson had stood from his place and was heading toward the platform stairs, his look determined. Maybe that's sufficient exhibition for this evening, the elder remarked as he reached the area, his tone conveying authority despite its mildness. We should advance to the donation declaration. It was a rescue for Joel, a method to leave the growingly deep encounter without embarrassment. But before Joel could take the aid, Chuck spoke once more. Sometimes, he stated softly, the most potent action is to drop your fists. Joel glanced down at his still elevated hands, the bodily bearing suddenly a flawless representation of his inner dilemma. Gradually, intentionally, he lowered them to his sides. The basic motion bore a significance that everyone in the space sensed. It wasn't capitulation, it was awareness. You're correct, Joel stated, his tone missing its typical refined echo. I was delivering that strike for all the incorrect motives. The confession lingered, truthful and plain. No inner truism, no biblical reference to cushion it, just unfiltered recognition. For the first time that night, Chuck Norris smiled, a minor, real display of regard. That, he stated, is the start of genuine power. The space stayed completely motionless. The praise group, ready to supply musical shift, remained quiet. Even the lens handlers seemed to pause breathing, their gear fixed on the scene at the platform's center. Elder Wilson delayed at the area's border, detecting that whatever was developing had surpassed simple amusement and entered the domain of true service. Though dissimilar to any he'd seen in his years at Lakewood, Joel stood unmoving, his usually lively aura tempered by the unforeseen move toward self-examination. His stare stayed on Chuck, not as a famous visitor or possible combat partner, but as something unanticipated, a guide. There's a distinction, Chuck proceeded, his tone reaching easily through the silent space, between battling to succeed and battling to safeguard what counts. He motioned toward the spectators. These folks didn't arrive tonight to observe a competition of vanities. They arrived searching for something real, something that addresses the struggles they encounter daily. Joel inclined slowly. You're correct. It's not about the display. Yet we converted it into one, Chuck noted without blame. The sacred battle you jested about. It occurs within us daily. Vanity against modesty. Presentation against reality. The terms hit target. Victoria observed her spouse's features register the effect of this mild yet deep correction. She'd attempted to convey the same to him numerous times over the years, as his service evolved from modest origins into the media giant it had become. But originating from Chuck Norris, a man whose existence embodied the control of managing power instead of displaying it, the communication landed differently. I'd still like to proceed with our exhibition, Chuck stated. If you're agreeable, but the actual exhibition isn't what the spectators anticipated. Joel paused only shortly before inclining his consent. I'm agreeable. Good, Chuck stated. Then let's display what a true sacred battle resembles. He faced the spectators straight. Ladies and gentlemen, the minister and I will exhibit something now. It might not seem impressive. It won't possess the flair or thrill you might anticipate, but I request you to observe attentively because what you'll witness is the most crucial struggle any of us ever confront. The assembly leaned ahead together, devices elevated to record whatever was about to develop. In the operations area, the overseer whispered strongly into his communication. Get close captures of both their expressions. Whatever occurs, stay focused. Chuck pivoted back to Joel. Position as I demonstrated earlier. Locate your alignment. Joel complied, settling into the equilibrated posture he'd acquired moments before. This time the bearing came more organically, his form recalling the correct setup. Good, Chuck inclined. Now I'm going to advance toward you. All you must do is preserve your spot. Not just bodily, but mentally. Remain aligned in who you truly are, not who you think others desire you to be. The directions appeared straightforward, but something in Chuck's manner implied levels of significance beyond the bodily exhibition. Chuck began advancing slowly toward Joel, his approach paced and intentional. As the separation between them narrowed, a palpable vigor built in the space. Not the fabricated thrill of amusement, but the real tension of observing something true and unplanned. When Chuck positioned directly before Joel, near enough that their auras undeniably shared the same area, he spoke again, his tone low yet somehow reaching all present. The instinctive response is to either assault or withdraw when someone invades your area, Chuck stated. The expert learns to merely exist, unaltered by outer force. Joel stayed motionless, visibly focusing on maintaining both his bodily posture and his poise. Now, Chuck proceeded, I'm going to elevate my palms as if to displace you. Recall, don't oppose me. Don't contend against force. Merely preserve your alignment, and the force becomes unimportant. Chuck gradually elevated his palms, fronts forward, positioning them to linger inches from Joel's arms, a spot from which he could readily unbalance the minister with the mildest displacement. The spectators observed, mesmerized. The symbolism was clear. Chuck Norris, the representation of controlled power, placed to overthrow Joel Osteen, the symbol of refined spiritual appeal. But instead of displacing, Chuck spoke once more. The hardest adversary we ever confront isn't outer, Chuck stated. It's inside us. Our vanity, our desire for endorsement, our fear of seeming fragile. His stare held Joel's firmly. The actual struggle isn't against body and blood. It's against the aspect of ourselves that selects looks over essence. Joel stayed quiet, taking in the terms. Something altered in his look. A subtle but deep change, as if strata of meticulously built image were peeling away to uncover something more exposed and true beneath. I've devoted decades instructing people how to battle, Chuck proceeded, his palms still lingering near Joel's arms. But the greatest triumphs I've achieved were against my own vanity. Not in the arena, not before lenses. Across the space, devices lowered gradually. One after another, the display many had arrived to document was changing into something less recordable, but vastly more significant, a serene instant of truth between two figures symbolizing distinct forms of authority. The actual exhibition starts now, Chuck stated, his tone scarcely above a murmur yet somehow occupying the area. I need you to shut your eyes. Joel delayed briefly, then followed. Standing before thousands with eyes sealed made him oddly exposed. The appealing preacher abruptly diminished to merely a person, deprived of his capacity to interpret and manipulate the group. Now, Chuck directed, I need you to sense the burden of all the anticipations you bear, the image you've formed, the appearance you uphold. Sense how substantial it is. Joel's arms visibly stiffened, his respiration becoming more intentional. Don't oppose that burden, Chuck proceeded. Just recognize it. Be truthful with yourself about how much vigor it requires to bear. In the initial seating, Victoria found herself pausing breath. She'd glimpsed her spouse's private conflicts with the load of his public appearance, instants of fatigue and uncertainty that never reached the broadcast. Now somehow those private conflicts were being revealed in the most public setting imaginable, yet in a manner that felt holy rather than intrusive. Now, Chuck stated, I need you to envision releasing that load, not forsaking your vocation, just the heaviness of enacting it. Joel's look shifted again, a burst of something like distress crossing his traits before settling into something more serene. His respiration deepened. Sense your genuine alignment, Chuck led. Not the alignment of focus, but the alignment of your true self. The space stayed utterly motionless, the shared assembly somehow sensing that they were observing not amusement, but change. Even Levi, typically unable to stay quiet for over 30 seconds, positioned motionless at the platform's border, captivated. Open your eyes, Chuck eventually stated. Joel's eyes opened leisurely. Something had altered in his stare, a clarity absent before, as if he were truly perceiving rather than displaying himself to be perceived. That, Chuck stated plainly, is the posture of genuine power. He lowered his palms from their lingering spot near Joel's arms, never having exerted the displacement everyone had expected. The actual force everyone now comprehended had been inner rather than outer. The sacred battle, Chuck proceeded, addressing both Joel and the spectators, isn't a display. It's the serene conflict we wage daily between our true intent and our vanity's need for confirmation. He pivoted to confront the assembly directly. You didn't arrive here this evening to observe two adults participate in staged combat. You arrived seeking something tangible, something that addresses the struggles you face when the beams aren't glowing and the lenses aren't operating. The terms echoed through the space, delivering with the serene might of truth. The finest warriors I've known, Chuck stated, weren't those who could fell others. They were those who remained steadfast in their values when the world pressed against them. Those who had the bravery to be true when pretense would have been simpler. He motioned toward Joel, who stayed positioned in the equilibrated bearing he'd been instructed. Your minister has just exhibited that bravery, permitting himself to be exposed before you instead of concealing behind enactment. The note hit target. Several spectators inclined in awareness. A few even brushed away unforeseen tears. Joel eventually spoke, his tone lacking its typical rehearsed rhythm, instead bearing the unprocessed quality of true insight. I emerged here this evening assuming I was going to amuse you with a cheerful invitation to Chuck Norris. Instead, he invited me not to a conflict but to truth. He looked straight at Chuck, a fresh modesty clear in his look. Thank you for that. It's a teaching I required more than I understood. Chuck inclined, a motion of recognition between peers rather than instructor and learner. Victoria felt her voice constrict with feeling. For years she'd observed Joel's service grow massively, connecting to millions but occasionally forfeiting closeness in the process. The Joel positioned on the platform now evoked the man she'd loved, sincere, exposed, true in his devotion rather than refined in his display of it. I've acquired something this evening, Joel proceeded, addressing the assembly. Something I wish to share with you all. For too long I've mixed effect with essence. I've gauged achievement by scope rather than profundity. He glanced at the massive displays bordering the platform, which showed his enlarged picture. I've grown so centered on how many individuals I could connect with that I occasionally overlooked what I was connecting them with. The confession lingered, its truthfulness striking a note with the thousands attending, many inclined in awareness, perceiving in Joel's conflict a mirror of their own struggles with truth versus looks. The actual sacred battle, Joel stated, gaining power from his fresh comprehension, isn't about demonstrating our power to others. It's about possessing the bravery to be truthful about our frailties. Chuck retreated, permitting Joel to completely inhabit the instant, not as a presenter reclaiming the beam, but as a guide reconnecting with his followers on a profounder level. I've positioned on this platform thousands of times, Joel proceeded, and delivered words of motivation that I sincerely trust. But somewhere in the process, I began concentrating more on how those words were conveyed than on the spirit behind them. He surveyed the ocean of faces, establishing visual contact with people, rather than performing for the lenses. This evening, Chuck Norris didn't instruct me how to battle. He reminded me how to position grounded in truth rather than enactment. Across the space, devices stayed lowered, online sharing briefly overlooked as something more significant than a widespread instant developed. This wasn't material to distribute. It was encounter to absorb. So, Joel ended, I'm not going to battle Chuck Norris this evening, at least not in the manner some of you might have anticipated. A soft wave of chuckles spread through the assembly. Instead, I'm going to accept the teaching he's provided me and implement it to every facet of my service moving ahead. He pivoted to Chuck, offering his palm, not for the staged grip of earlier, but with true appreciation. Thank you for displaying what actual power resembles. Chuck accepted Joel's palm, the motion basic yet potent in its truthfulness. True authority, he stated, never needs to validate itself. The fourth emblematic signal, again just the operations alert, though its timing persisted to seem heaven-sent, rang through the space. But unlike prior, when the signals had emphasized instants of strain, this chime felt like closure, the final tone of a piece that had shifted from disharmony to accord. Big Ray, observing from the platform's border, found himself unexpectedly touched. In his years of protection work, He'd seen innumerable instances of fabricated motivation, the computed emotional highs that were the staple of megachurch service. But this differed. This was authentic. As Joel and Chuck positioned together at the platform's center, neither presenting nor rivaling, but merely existing in mutual comprehension, the group started to stand, not in the rehearsed thrill of amusement, but in the respectful acknowledgement of true change. In the operations area, the overseer whispered into his communication, "Maintain the broad capture, don't interrupt, just allow this to exist." The picture seized on the space's enormous displays and sent to millions viewing the broadcast conveyed the tale more articulately than terms could. Two men from separate realms, joined not in conflict but in shared regard, exhibiting that the utmost power lies not in supremacy, but in truthfulness. "Ladies and gentlemen," Levi eventually stated, advancing with atypical control, "I think we've just observed the real significance of this evening's belief and wellness theme. Not a display of bodily skill, but an exhibition of inner power." He motioned toward Chuck and Joel. "I think we all arrived expecting one type of authority shown. Instead, we've been gifted with something far deeper." The assembly's claps ascended, not the wild thrill of amusement, but the reflective gratitude of true understanding. As the claps diminished, Joel spoke once more, his tone bearing the serene certainty of fresh belief. "Before we proceed with this evening's agenda, I'd like to encourage everyone to pause for consideration, not just about what you've seen, but about your own sacred battle, the conflict between truth and looks in your own existence." The appeal would have appeared artificial coming from the Joel Osteen of 60 Minutes prior. Now it bore the significance of shared conflict rather than cliched direction. Across the space, heads lowered in true contemplation. Chuck Norris retreated, his objective fulfilled without a single strike delivered. The true conflict, the one against vanity, against enactment, against the emptiness of image without essence, had been conducted and triumphed in the serene battlefield of a human spirit. And everyone attending knew they had observed something much more potent than any bodily clash could have been. The contemplative quiet that descended over the Lakewood church space endured nearly a complete minute, an eternity in the setting of a highly fabricated gathering where empty time was usually evaded at any price. Yet no one acted to occupy the emptiness. Not the praise group, prepared with tools set. Not Levi, whose drive to maintain high vigor had been briefly tempered by the seriousness of the instant. Not even the operations team, who had forsaken their meticulously planned section shifts in acknowledgement that something more vital was developing. When Joel eventually spoke again, his tone bore a quality that regular participants noticed right away. A profundity and reflectiveness that recalled his initial days of service before the gloss of fame had been completely added. "I wish to express gratitude to Chuck Norris," Joel stated, "not merely for being our featured visitor this evening, but for providing all of us a teaching in true power." He pivoted to confront Chuck straight. "You've achieved so much in your existence, global titles, film triumphs, cultural symbol status. You could have arrived this evening and simply enjoyed the praise. Instead, you opted to instruct, to confront, to raise this gathering beyond amusement into something substantial." Chuck recognized the terms with a minor incline, his look staying composed. Unlike Joel, whose emotional path had unfolded visibly on his features, Chuck preserved the stable aura that had defined him all night, a living representation of the command and control he advocated. "I'd like to encourage Chuck to offer a few terms," Joel proceeded, providing the device not as our famous visitor, but as our instructor. The encouragement signified a notable change in the night's flow, Joel willingly yielding the focus, something that seldom happened in the carefully coordinated realm of Lakewood gatherings. Chuck took the device with typical spareness of action. When he spoke, his terms were paced, each seeming to bear the significance of decades of experienced life. "Devotion doesn't yell," he stated plainly. The declaration lingered, misleadingly direct yet deep in its suggestions. Several spectators inclined in awareness. Others leaned ahead, detecting more would follow. "Throughout my existence," Chuck proceeded, "I've noted that the individuals with the most to provide seldom feel compelled to demonstrate it. The really robust don't pose for the lenses. The sincerely devoted don't enact their commitment for praise." His stare swept the assembly, direct but not aggressive. "I'm not here to condemn display or to imply that connecting to millions with a communication is incorrect. But I am implying that the method we connect to them matters as much as the number we connect to. In the initial seating, Elder Wilson sat straighter, his focus completely seized. As one of the congregation's longest-serving guides, he had privately held worries about the path of Lakewood's service, the growing emphasis on fabrication worth sometimes appearing to eclipse the essence of the communication. Here, unexpectedly, those worries were being expressed by none other than Chuck Norris. In karate, Chuck continued, we have a phrase, the noisiest individual in the setting is seldom the most robust. True authority doesn't need to declare itself. It's clear indeed in reliability and serene honesty. He motioned toward Joel, positioned beside him with a typical stillness. Your minister has displayed real power this evening, the bravery to be exposed, to set aside enactment and embrace truth. That's far more striking than any exhibition of bodily skill could have been. Joel accepted the note with clear modesty, his usual lens-ready bearing replaced by something more true. The greatest struggle any of us will confront, Chuck stated, addressing the whole space now, isn't against outer resistance. It's the daily conflict between our true intent and our vanity's call for confirmation, between essence and looks, between aiding others and aiding our own appearance. Across the assembly, devices stayed lowered. Online sharing momentarily overlooked as the terms resonated with personal conflicts many had never voiced yet immediately recognized. I didn't arrive this evening to sermonize, Chuck recognized with the suggestion of a grin. That's not my vocation. But I did arrive to share what a lifetime of control has instructed me. That true authority lies not in overpowering others, but in commanding yourself. Victoria observed from the platform's side, unexpectedly touched. In the early years of Joel's service, before Lakewood had expanded to its present scale, there had been a comparable quality to his sermonizing, a true exposure, an emphasis on essence over manner. Somewhere along the path, as fabrication standards rose and audience sizes increased, that quality had grown increasingly uncommon, replaced by refined enactment that connected to millions, but sometimes missed the close truth of those initial days. Now, paradoxically, before the largest audience conceivable, that true quality had resurfaced, not through meticulous planning, but through unforeseen confrontation with the very concepts Joel had been proclaiming. I'll conclude with this idea, Chuck stated, his tone bearing the serene authority that had made him not just a warrior, but a respected instructor. Devotion, like combat posture, is most potent when it's foundational rather than enacted, when it's experienced more than it's shown. He returned the device to Joel, retreating with the subtle elegance that had marked his actions all night. Joel took it, visibly affected by Chuck's terms. For several moments he appeared to ponder what to state next, not in the rehearsed manner of a preacher constructing dramatic strain, but in the true way of someone handling insight in actual time. You know, Joel eventually stated, I've positioned on this platform thousands of times and discussed victory, about power, about surmounting barriers. But this evening, Chuck Norris has displayed to me that sometimes the greatest triumph isn't in overpowering situations, but in having the modesty to learn from them. He pivoted to confront the assembly directly, his look more open than at any earlier point in the night. I wish to make a pledge to all of you this evening. A pledge to essence over display, to truth over enactment, to being truly present rather than flawlessly displayed. The terms clearly resonated with the spectators, many of whom had observed the rising fabrication values of Lakewood gatherings over the years, the ever more intricate light displays, the meticulously coordinated musical performances, the studio-quality visual packages. While none of these features were inherently troublesome, their combined effect had sometimes been to generate separation rather than closeness, impression rather than effect. That doesn't mean we'll cease using tools or media to disseminate divine communication, Joel explained. But it does mean we'll be more aware of why we're using them, of whether they're improving the essence of our service or sometimes replacing it. He glanced toward the operations area, where the technical group shared significant looks. They had constructed their professions on generating impeccable religious amusement. Joel's term suggested a possible realignment of priorities that would impact them all. The irony isn't overlooked by me, Joel proceeded with a self-mocking grin, that I'm making this pledge during a highly fabricated donation extravaganza before lenses transmitting to millions. But perhaps that's precisely where this awareness needed to occur, at the crossroads of display and essence. A surge of grateful chuckles moved through the assembly, releasing some of the emotional strain that had accumulated during the unforeseen sequence of events. So, Joel ended, while this night didn't include the kind of sacred battle that was playfully proposed, I believe we've all observed something far more potent, a display of what happens when we have the bravery to set aside our meticulously built images and embrace true development. He pivoted to Chuck once more. Thank you for that teaching. It's one I won't overlook, and I suspect many others won't either. Chuck recognized the appreciation with serene dignity, neither pursuing further focus nor hastening to retreat from it, simply existing in the instant, personifying the concepts he had exhibited. The fifth emblematic signal chimed gently through the audio system, indicating the shift to the gathering's next part. But unlike the programmed changes between amusement parts that had been organized, this shift felt natural, a spontaneous advancement from understanding to implementation. Now, Joel stated, I'd like us to redirect this evening's concentration to the genuine aim of this gathering, supporting our international service efforts, not as an enactment of donation, but as a true manifestation of devotion indeed. He motioned toward the displays, where pictures emerged of Lakewood's efforts in disadvantaged groups worldwide, pure water initiatives, health centers, learning programs. These were the concrete expressions of the congregation's goal, often eclipsed by the more visible elements of its service. These endeavors, Joel described, symbolize devotion shown through aid rather than display, and while we've already attained our starting fundraising aim this evening, I believe what we've shared together urges us to target higher, not just in funds collected, but in existences affected. As he detailed the broadened vision for Lakewood's charitable efforts, there was a fresh quality to his delivery. Less the refined promoter, more the fervent supporter. The distinction was subtle but distinct, especially to those who had tracked his service for years. Victoria experienced a complex blend of feelings as she observed her spouse navigate this unforeseen change. Pride in his readiness to embrace development in such a public setting, hope that the understandings of this night would lead to enduring alteration, and a certain nostalgia, recognizing in his current truth echoes of the young preacher she'd loved decades before, prior to success adding layers of gloss that sometimes created distance between his public image and private self. Across the space, the spectators seemed to detect the change too. The vigor had transformed from the expectant thrill of amusement to something more reflective, a shared acknowledgement that they were observing not just a donation gathering, but a potential pivotal moment in their congregation's approach to service. As Joel finished his delivery of the broadened charitable efforts, he pivoted once more to Chuck. Before we proceed with the agenda, I want to request Chuck Norris to guide us in a moment of supplication, not as our famous visitor, but as someone whose deeds this evening have personified the concepts of devotion more articulately than terms could convey. The encouragement represented yet another deviation from the usual plan, where supplication was typically the realm of Lakewood's clerical staff, rather than visiting celebrities. But in this setting it felt completely suitable, a recognition that spiritual authority flows from true living rather than official role. Chuck inclined his acceptance of the encouragement. He didn't advance to claim the platform's center or elevate his palms in dramatic plea. Instead, he simply lowered his head, his bearing one of true reverence rather than enacted piety. When he supplicated, his terms bore the same paced quality that had marked all his speech all night, direct yet deep, without needless adornment. Lord, he started, assist us to contend the correct conflicts not against one another but against our own vanity, not for notice but for true intent. May our power be gauged not by how many observe us, but by how reliably we embody our principles when no one watches. Across the space, heads lowered in earnest reflection, the supplication delivering with particular force in the context of the night's unforeseen teachings. And Lord, Chuck ended, thank you for instants that humble us, for confrontations that disclose our true base, for reminders that true authority isn't in enactment, but in intent lived truly. Amen, amen, echoed through the space. Not the mechanical reply of religious habit, but the reflective confirmation of shared understanding. As Chuck retreated, Joel advanced, once more his look reflecting both the burden and the liberation of the night's revelations. Let's proceed with our agenda, he stated, but perhaps with fresh perspectives, with greater consciousness of why we assemble, not just how strikingly we do so. The praise group began performing, but the tune seemed altered now, less spectacular, more assisting, not demanding emotional reply but generating room for true reflection. As the agenda shifted into its next part, Victoria met her spouse's gaze across the platform and saw something there that had grown increasingly uncommon in recent years. Not the content glow of successful enactment, but the serene peace of true presence. The sacred battle had indeed been conducted that night, not in the staged combat some had expected, but in the serene battlefield of a human spirit confronting its own drives. And in that domain, everyone attending recognized the true triumph had been achieved not through supremacy, but through yielding to a higher intent. The Lakewood church space gradually cleared, the large group scattering into the mild Houston evening. The Belief in Wellness gathering had formally ended half an hour prior, yet hundreds lingered, some in small discussion groups, others seated in silent thought. The night had provided something unanticipated, and many appeared unwilling to shatter the enchantment by returning to regular life. In the rear hallway leading from the primary platform to the management offices, Chuck Norris advanced leisurely, his aura as composed in departure as it had been in arrival. Unlike famous visitors who usually left promptly after their parts, encircled by attendants and guards, Chuck progressed with the serene independence that had defined his whole stay. Big Ray Mendoza matched his pace beside him, not intruding but keeping a respectful closeness. "I can guide you to the special exit, Mr. Norris. Your transport should be ready." Chuck inclined appreciation. "Thank you, but I'm not rushing." They advanced in easy quiet for several steps before Ray spoke again. "That was remarkable out there this evening. Not what anyone anticipated." A trace of a grin crossed Chuck's features. "The most worthwhile teachings rarely are." Ray inclined reflectively. In his years of protection work, he'd honed a skill for assessing people, separating the true from the enacted. Chuck Norris, he realized, was precisely as promoted, a man of essence rather than display. "You know," Ray stated, "I was in the Marines before joining the congregation staff. We had trainers who discussed you, not just the combat methods, but the mindset, the command, the control." Chuck recognized this with humble gratitude. The bodily abilities are merely the start. The mental control is where true expertise resides. "I witnessed that this evening," Ray consented. "The way you managed the circumstance, it wasn't about overpowering, Pastor Joel. It was about displaying another path." They arrived at a fork in the hallway, where one route led to the special exit and another to the offstage zone. Chuck paused, seeming to weigh his choices. "I'd like to converse with Pastor Osteen once more before departing," he resolved. Ray inclined, altering their path toward the offstage zone. "He's likely in the lounge with Mrs. Osteen and the operations team. They usually conduct a brief review after major gatherings." As they neared the lounge, they could hear lively discussion through the partly ajar door. Not the festive summary that normally followed successful Lakewood fabrications, but something more essential and probing. "Completely alters how we handle the weekend transmissions," came Joel's tone, invigorated in a manner that suggested revelation rather than enactment. "Less emphasis on the visual extravaganza, more on fostering true bonds." "The technical group will require adjustment time," replied another tone, probably the operations overseer. "We've established our standing on superior fabrication worth. We'll preserve quality," Joel reassured, "but serving essence, not as a replacement for it." Ray tapped lightly on the door frame, then opened the door wider. "Pardon me, Pastor Joel. Mr. Norris would like a discussion before he departs." The talk inside halted immediately. Joel stood from his seat, his look showing true delight rather than the rehearsed warmth he typically showed for special visitors. "Chuck, please enter. We were just talking about the effect of this evening's gathering." The lounge contained a small group: Joel and Victoria, the operations overseer with his notepad of details, Levy browsing online reactions on his device, and two congregational elders, including Wilson, whose reflective look suggested he was still handling the night's unforeseen shift. Chuck entered with typical understatement, declining the central seat Joel provided, and instead selecting a chair slightly apart from the main discussion circle. "I wanted to express thanks before departing," Chuck stated, "for permitting this evening to become something distinct from what was organized." Joel chuckled mildly, shaking his head. I think you orchestrated that change, not me. But I'm thankful for it. He glanced at the others in the room. We all are, in fact. It's provided us much to consider about the path of our service. Victoria inclined agreement. Sometimes you require an external viewpoint to notice patterns you've been too near to detect. Her stare held Chuck's with true appreciation. Your exhibition this evening addressed something we've been sensing, but hadn't completely voiced: the need to re-equilibrate essence and delivery. The digital feedback is amazing, Levi added, displaying his device. Not the standard incredible fabrication remarks we usually receive. People are discussing truth about being affected on a profounder level. He browsed the entries. One observer wrote, "For the first time in years, I felt like Pastor Joel was addressing me directly, not enacting for all." Joel took this in with thoughtful deliberation, rather than the swift contentment he might once have derived from affirmative comments. That's precisely the alteration we need to make, away from enactment toward true existence. Chuck attended without remark, his stillness offering space for the others to handle their understandings. Elder Wilson, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "Mr. Norris, I've been with Lakewood since prior to our move into this space. I've observed our connection expand massively, which has been a gift in many ways." He paused, selecting his terms carefully. "But I've sometimes pondered if what we acquired in width we occasionally forfeited in depth. This evening felt like an adjustment." "Of course," Chuck replied. "The most potent posture is one that can adjust without forfeiting its base." The note delivered with particular significance coming from him, a man whose bodily control had made him a symbol, yet whose inner depth had enabled him to convert that control into wisdom. "Will you remain for the weekend gathering?" Joel inquired. "It would be meaningful to have you there as we start to apply some of these understandings." Chuck shook his head mildly. "My function here is finished. The actual effort belongs to you and your assembly now." His terms bore no censure, only clear assessment. He had acted as spark. The change itself would demand continuous dedication from those guiding the congregation. "I comprehend," Joel inclined. "But please know you'll always be welcomed here, not as a famous visitor, but as an instructor." Chuck recognized the encouragement with serene gratitude, then stood to depart. "One final idea," he stated, pausing at the entrance. "The strongest warriors I've known weren't those who never stumbled. They were those who utilized each stumble as a chance to construct a firmer base." The terms lingered as he left, Big Ray matching pace beside him once more. They advanced in friendly quiet through the now vacant hallways of the space, the night's vigor having dispersed into the serene aftermath of true effect. As they neared the special exit, Ray spoke again. "You know what occurred this evening will connect to millions via the transmission. It might alter how people consider devotion and truth." Chuck weighed this without altering stride. "Perhaps, but the actual gauge won't be in how many observe it, but in how profoundly it alters those who do." They arrived at the exit, where a basic black vehicle waited with motor operating. No extravagant transport, no notice-seeking conveyance, just practical utility, like everything else about Chuck's attendance. "It's been a privilege, Mr. Norris," Ray stated, offering his palm. "What you displayed us this evening about true power, I won't overlook it." Chuck gripped the provided palm with firm regard. "The privilege was mine." He moved toward the vehicle, then halted and pivoted back. "Recall, Mr. Mendoza, protection isn't just about shielding people from outer dangers. Sometimes the most vital protection comes from truth voiced at the proper instant." Ray inclined, comprehending the deeper significance. As head of protection, he had always defined his function in terms of bodily safeguarding. But this evening had disclosed another aspect, the security that comes from true base rather than striking facade. Chuck entered the waiting vehicle without ceremony. As the transport departed from the space, its rear lights fading into the Houston evening, Ray stayed at the exit, contemplating the unforeseen teachings of the night. Inside the lounge, the discussion continued with renewed intent. The operations team had begun outlining adjustments to the weekend gathering, not forsaking the tools and connection that had made Lakewood a worldwide service, but redirecting those instruments toward deeper bond rather than mere impression. "We'll need to ready the assembly for the alteration," Elder Wilson recommended. "Some have grown used to the display. They might find greater truth initially disconcerting. True development often is," Victoria noted, "but it's essential." Joel inclined agreement, his look reflecting both the challenge and opportunity ahead. What Chuck displayed us this evening wasn't just about how I display myself on stage. It was about the whole environment we've established, one that sometimes prioritizes looks over essence. He stood and shifted to the window, surveying the now vacant space. But environment can alter. It begins with guidance modeling different principles. Levi, still browsing online reactions, looked up with atypical reflectiveness. You know what's odd? I entered this evening centered on generating widespread instance, shareable material. I was the one who proposed the entire sacred battle idea. He shook his head with a grin. And we obtained exactly that, just not in the manner any of us anticipated. That's the contradiction, Victoria stated softly. The instant became potent precisely because it wasn't designed for effect. It was simply true. Joel turned from the window, his look resolute. Starting the weekend, we apply what we've acquired. Less display, more essence. Less enactment, more existence. He looked at each individual in the room, establishing true bond rather than delivering a declaration. Not because Chuck Norris instructed us to, but because he reminded us of what we already understood but had slowly overlooked. The sixth emblematic signal, the final operations alert of the night, chimed softly through the space's audio. The noise echoed through the empty area, no longer indicating section shifts but serving as a concluding emphasis to the evening's unforeseen teachings. In his lodging across the city, Chuck Norris sat quietly in contemplation, his day's objective complete. He had arrived in Houston not seeking to generate a display or to validate his importance, but simply to provide what decades of control had instructed him, that true power lies not in supremacy, but in truth. As morning light emerged over Houston the next day, Chuck departed his lodging and transported himself to the airport in the same unpretentious way he'd preserved throughout his stay. No attendance, no ceremony, just the serene independence of a man whose security originated from within rather than from outer confirmation. Settling into his place on the standard flight home, he accessed his device to view headlines already circulating across spiritual news. Sources: Chuck Norris provides unforeseen, teaching at Lakewood Church. Joel Osteen changed after sacred. Battle with karate icon. Authenticity versus enactment. Norris confronts megachurch. Environment. The pieces included video segments that had already spread widely, not of staged combat or famous display, but of true change enacted in real time before thousands of observers. Comment areas overflowed with observers describing how the unforeseen meeting had prompted reflection on their own conflicts between truth and looks, essence and display. Chuck shut the device, uninterested in the online continuation of the gathering. The actual effect, he understood, wouldn't be gauged in observations or distributions, but in altered spirits and redirected priorities. As his flight ascended, carrying him away from Houston and the waves of influence he generated there, Chuck Norris smiled faintly, gazing out at the clouds beneath. The sacred battle had indeed taken place, not through bodily supremacy but through the serene authority of controlled example. And in that most vital domain, only one path had emerged victorious: the path of truth over vanity, essence over display, serene honesty over loud enactment. Devotion, like true power, had demonstrated once again that it doesn't need to yell to be heard. It simply needs to be experienced with steadfast dedication to truth, a teaching more potent than any spinning kick could ever be. Up next, we have 2 more amazing accounts ready for you. Just select the picture you wish to view, and it will guide you there. If you appreciated this video, ensure to follow. It would support us greatly.